Hi, everybody. Welcome back to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Raven. Our guest today is Hank Levine. He is the president and CEO of iPlace USA. They are a global recruitment process outsourcing company. Hank has 39 years of experience in areas including sales, business development, marketing, and general management. He created the marketing and business strategies for 6 companies, 4 of which were acquired for a total of $92 million. Hank has twice reinvented his career, as he puts it. So before heading offshore recruiting firms, he held senior management positions in venture capital-backed technology companies. The first phase of his career was with some cutting-edge home automation and telecom firms. So Hank holds a bachelor's in engineering. So it's good to talk to another engineer from the University of Pennsylvania. And he has a master's degree in management from the Sloan School at MIT. So we have that Sloan connection in common. So with that, Hank, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing fantastic, Mark. It's an honor to be on your podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. And I know we're going to have a lot of interesting things to talk about. We'll come back to this later. I've heard one of your favorite mistake stories. I don't know if that's the one or kind of 2 stories that you're going to share today. So maybe we'll just jump right into it. You know, of the different things you've done, different facets and phases of your career, Hank. What would you say is at least a favorite mistake?
Well, okay, so I would prefer not to call them mistakes. I would prefer to call them learning experiences. So I'm going to go back real early in my career. There's actually 2 that I thought of because these were things that profoundly changed how I think about management and how I interact with people. So we can go into 2 of them.
Great. Yeah, go. Yeah, and I do appreciate that. I mean, the spirit here on the podcast, as you know, is to celebrate the learning, not to shame anybody for the mistake. So, yeah, go ahead with that first story, Hank.
Okay, so the first one, this goes way back into the late 1980s. So I'm aging myself a bit on that one. But this was my first company out of business school. It was a very fun company called Custom Command Systems. And we were a developer and installer of very comprehensive, very expensive, high-end home automation systems. And we worked, throughout the country and even some internationally in very, very large homes. And I was one of the founders of the company, and initially I did all the sales. And these were very elaborate systems. So when we sold them, we put together these beautiful bounded proposals. They were full of pictures. You had to be a good writer to put these proposals together because we tried to personalize them, talk about our client's home, talk about all those things that made their homes distinctive. And I was pretty successful at selling these systems, using this elaborate proposal. Then we got a little bit bigger. So these systems were quite expensive, typically sold between $200,000 and $300,000. So in today's dollars, that would be over $500,000. We were up to selling about 10 systems a year. We were growing nicely. So we hired our first other salesperson. I hired this gentleman named Chris. He was just a great guy. He was working for this national audio video home-wide system installer. And Chris had just a great personality, a really big personality. Everybody totally loved him. But turned out that Chris was not a very good writer. And I was trying to have Chris do things my way, where we had this elaborate proposal. You had to write very well to make the proposal good. And Chris just couldn't do it. And I kept reworking his proposal. And in my mind, Chris was failing.
Yeah.
We had a second employee. Her name was Dana. Dana was our accountant. She was very smart. She was meticulous as could be, very organized, a very good writer. And she was great at accounting, but being that we were a startup, of course, cash flow is very, very critical. And one of Dana's jobs was that she had to call people and make sure that we were being paid on time. Dana was, to this day, maybe the most shy person I've ever met. She even so shy that she couldn't really talk well to people within her own company. And the thought of her calling clients and asking for money was just something she could not do. And I
Mhm.
would tell her over and over, that's an important part of our job. Cash flow is so critical. Please do
Right.
it. Please do it. She just wouldn't do it.
Mhm.
So in my mind, she was partially failing too.
Mhm.
Then something amazing happened. So Chris went out to a new client of ours to present our proposal. So this was a client in Palm Springs, California. He was
Mhm.
coming from our home base in Maryland. And in those days, this was before cell phones. So whenever Chris would go out and present a proposal, right after the meeting was over, he would go somewhere, he would find a payphone, and he would call me and he would tell me how it went. So I was expecting that he would be done about 5 o'clock California time, about 8 o'clock my time. And I'm waiting for Chris to call me. No call, no call.
Right.
Gets to 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. I figure Chris is on the red eye. He must be coming back. I'll talk to him tomorrow.
Yeah.
And about 11:30, I get this phone call, and it's Chris. And I say, Chris, I was waiting for your call. Where are you? What's happening? He goes, well, you wouldn't believe it. The meeting went great. The client loves this. They're going forward. And we really hit it off. We're having such a great relationship that they asked me to stay over for the weekend. And I'm
Wow.
calling you from their swimming pool. This was before cell phones, right? So to do this, he was calling on a cellular phone. It's one of the first cellular phones in the country. Again, we had very wealthy clients.
Yeah.
The cellular phones in this day, they had a receiver that was like in a big suitcase. The phone
Sure.
itself was like a big 12-inch block.
Yeah.
Cost about $3 a minute to make a phone call. And he's calling me from their swimming pool, telling me that they asked him to stay at their house with them until Sunday. So that
Huh.
just blew my mind
Sure.
because I could never imagine any client liking me so much that they would invite me to stay for the weekend. And I
Yeah.
just realized that Chris has this special skill where he can relate to people. He can build relationships so much better than I can.
Mhm.
That Monday, he came back to our office and I had this brainstorm. I said, Chris and Dana, I am making you guys a team.
Mm.
Dana's a great writer. She is going to write all your proposals for you, but you'll go out and build the relationships and present them. And Chris, you can you could deliver the worst news to anyone in the world, and they would love you. They would take you out for a beer. So all these collection calls, you will do her collection calls, and they both loved it.
Yeah.
The thing they hated doing, we took it off their plate. They worked together great as a team, and they were both phenomenally successful.
Wow.
And so from that point on, I just realized that I was really messing up because I was trying to force them to do things how I would do it, doing things that I'm good at or things that
Yeah.
didn't bother me, and I wasn't building on their strengths. And once I let them do things that they love and build on their strengths, they flourish.
Mhm.
And so now whenever I put a team together, I first start with thinking about the team members, what they're good at,
Mm.
and we'll completely develop the process around their strengths.
Wow. That's yeah, I mean, it's a great story. You make me think of, yeah, this idea of the right fit. I mean, I'm sure, with we'll come back and talk about iPlace. I mean, I imagine that's a question for clients of finding the right fit. Like you have a lot of good people that might just not be a good fit for a certain role, and that's a really vivid example of discovering it in that business. Sounds, and like you said, that's carried forward. That concept carried forward with you into other roles, other leadership positions. Can you think of any examples of kind of putting that into practice?
Now you there's a great one in iPlace. On that, uh, our EVP of strategy, he was originally a recruiter. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He has a brilliant analytical mind, a brilliant business mind. And when he started with us as a recruiter, he wasn't very good because he was just too analytical. He would study everything. He wouldn't submit candidates because they weren't perfect. He would actually draw charts. He was showing probabilities of placements. And I would tell him, just submit the candidate, just submit the candidate.
Yeah.
And we had a leadership development program where he blew everyone away. He did all this research. But he was just so analytical. So we started a data analytics team, and he created this system for iPlace called Launchpad, which is a whole gamification system for how we run the company. And when we put Fred into the right seat, took him out of being a recruiter and let him do things that were analytical and business strategy, he's just been phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a leadership challenge there, a general business challenge of trying to figure out if somebody's not performing in a certain role, if you can't coach them up in that role, is it better off for everybody? Do they need to leave the organization, or can you find a different role that's a better fit? If you like the person, their attitude, you want them to be part of the team. I wonder how often leaders would just give up on somebody as opposed to finding a better fit.
Well, if you're a really tiny company and you don't have flexibility in roles, maybe. But in my view, there are very few people that don't want to be great employees. All right, people want to be like, they want to be respected, they want to feel smart, important, and valued. And if you find someone that is smart and that person is working hard, that person is not being successful in their job, 9 out of 10 times you can make them successful if you get to know them, you get to know what they love, and you put them in the right position. Not always, but almost always.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, your story about Chris and Dana is one I've heard at least once from a previous guest in terms of, a founder wanting others to do the work in the way that worked for them, and trying to force that fit. And, I appreciate you sharing, that lesson learned and partnering Chris and Dana. I mean, like for that client in Palm Springs, did Chris sell the deal without such a fancy proposal? Like I could see the idea of pairing them up, but I'm just curious, did you ever experiment with was such a fancy proposal really needed?
Well, it was, because these were so expensive and our proposals were good, and they were very. But that one, I wrote the proposal. I wrote most of it. But after that, Dana wrote the proposals for him.
Okay, so Chris did. Okay, he did have the benefit of your partnership, but as a founder and doing other things, you needed to be working on your own deals. Otherwise, hiring Chris, if you were pairing up, why hire another salesperson? You were trying to scale.
I mean, that was, wrongly on my part. I was probably resentful because I would have Chris do the first proposal. It wasn't very good. The writing wasn't good, and I would generally just redo the whole thing. But once Dana got in the picture, I barely touched it.
And then, as that company grew, did you scale? How many salespeople did you find? Other salespeople that maybe had both skill sets, or was that pairing up model something that you kept using?
We when we sold the company, we had 3 salespeople. This wasn't a large volume company.
Sure.
But Dana was overseeing things, doing the writing.
Yeah. Cool. There was a second story. I assume Chris and Dana, that was the two of them. There's a second story coming, right?
Yeah. So after we sold custom command systems, I had my first time working in a very, very large company. So this was a huge telecommunication company, and they were working in this very large joint venture with 4 other companies to develop a video service that was supposed to compete with the cable companies. The cable companies were starting to get into telephony, and so they thought, well, we'll get them back. We'll get into video. And a big part of their system was a television-based user interface that would be, run through a remote control. And it turned out, I was hired to do, the project management. So this was about a $2 billion project. I was running the project management, but I knew a lot about user interfaces because I came from custom command where we built touchscreens.
Yeah.
And
for context, what was the timing of this? Was this very early days of on-screen interfaces? I mean, I remember back even into the 90s, you'd flip channels and you might see the channel number and that's it.
Yes. So custom command was in the late 80s, and this was in the early 90s.
Okay.
All right. So, um, so even though I was, supposed to be doing project management, I had all this knowledge in my head from custom command. We control things with remote controls, we control things with touchscreens. I knew how to build this interface. So I wrote this 80-page specification on my own time.
Yeah.
And then I went around telling everybody how my user interface was so much better, that I had this real world experience. I knew how people use this stuff, and we should replace the one that this team is building with mine.
Yeah.
And, and I was sure mine was better, and it probably
Yeah.
was better. Right?
Yeah.
So
But that wasn't your job.
that wasn't my job. So
Yeah.
one day I get this message that the EVP of the company wants to meet with me. And I had met this guy probably one time. He reported to the CEO of the company. So I go into his office and he says, Hank, I wanted to talk to you because I like you. And I've heard really good things about you. I heard that you're really smart. I hear that you're a really hard worker. But I'm also here to tell you that you're very close to getting fired.
Yeah.
And I was amazed by that. How could I be really close to getting fired? So he takes out this piece of paper and he draws two dots. He labels 1A, 1B. And he goes, I want you to show me what the fastest way is to get from point A to point B. So I wasn't really sure what was happening, but I did the obvious thing. I drew a straight line from point A to point B.
Right.
And he says, well, if that's how you do things in this company, you'll get fired. So then he draws four more dots. He draws and he goes from C, D, E, and F. And he goes, here's how you get from A to B in this company. So he goes to A and he draws a line to B, and the C, and the D, then the E, and finally, to F to back to B. And he goes, in this company, if you just forge ahead and go from A to B, there's all these decision makers, there's all these people with big egos. You're going to be encroaching on their budgets, you're going to be encroaching on their turf. They will gang up with you and they will make sure what you're doing never happens and you can get fired,
Yeah.
even if you're doing a great job. And
Yeah.
I sat there. I have to tell you, my first reaction coming out of my startup was, what a terrible company, what a big bureaucracy this is. I can't, that's why they can't make decisions. But then I thought about it more and I realized he was absolutely correct, because to be a leader, you absolutely have to have followers, and you can't just command people to follow you.
Yeah.
This is what I call the curse of the expert. I had a lot of expertise because I came from this world, but nobody knew I had this expertise. They didn't know what I understood. They all came with their own beliefs, and these very senior people had hired this user interface group. These people were supposed to be, very good at their job, and I'm essentially telling them that their decisions were all wrong, and I was better. And they didn't know why I would say that. I was just a problem for them.
Yeah.
And so, the more I thought about it, I realized that, again, you can't be a leader without followers. And I see business leaders make this mistake all the time, where I really see it was like with politicians, because politicians might be an expert in some, arcane policy area, and they write a bill and they suspect, because they know more, they expect everyone to get on board. And people don't get on board. They all have their political agenda. They all have their own beliefs. And so to, get things to work, you really, you do have to socialize your ideas. Developing followers is hard work. And it's not, and you won't go from A to B if you do it. You have to go to the other points. But if you don't bring followers along, you're not leading anybody.
Yeah. 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 I mean, you talk about the curse of the expert, the curse of, the great technical education. And then trying to navigate, like you said, being a founder in a startup versus coming into a huge corporation, very different environments. And, it sounds like thankfully that EVP was willing to try to educate you around the reality of the politics of that situation. And, the thing that I was going to share, having, technical education and having fallen into You kind of a similar pattern, especially early in my career, maybe even sometime today. Hopefully I'm learning from that. But there's times where I would complain to my wife, who also has a technical education, but she has a higher EQ, emotional intelligence, I think. And not I think, I know, but I would say, oh, I hate politics. And she'd say, like, that's the reality. You can't hate the politics. You can't wish it wasn't there. You have to navigate the politics. So, good coaching from her, I think. Easier said than done for me. But yeah, that was the reality.
Yeah, and the ironic thing at the time, I didn't really appreciate the EVP's advice, but now I super appreciate it. And one of the things I realized that in startups, you this problem isn't as common because you have your founding team and you're all in a room working together, and you collectively develop your expertise. So you have that shared understanding. But if you take someone out of that startup and you put them in a big company, nobody else there has that understanding.
Yeah.
And so you really do have to socialize it to get everyone at a common level where they can move forward.
Yeah. So what happened? You had your proposal, you had your ideas. Did any of that move forward as a result of better navigating this, or did the bureaucracy say, no, hey, Hank, thank you, but we already have a plan?
Well, I stayed more in my lane, but I did make friends with some of the people in the user interface team. We started. They changed their development and process a little bit, based on some of my recommendations, being, more rapid prototyping, iterative development, and I think that over times, I still had I wasn't really pushing this, but I still had an open dialogue with them. And I think a bunch of my ideas to get into this design, but maybe not as much as I would have liked them to.
Sure. And then, did you end up in a situation, Hank, where the tables had turned at some point where you were more in that position, like the EVP, giving advice or counsel to somebody who was younger, who might have been making some form of that same mistake?
Well, I think both these stories are things that I, try to mentor people on all the time when I talk to them now, and certainly in iPlace. iPlace is interesting because we have about 950 employees, but I'm the only person in the U.S. So our employees are in India and in the Philippines, and but we have a very Western work culture and very Western understanding, and it's we do really very, very much encourage people to speak up and express their ideas, not stay in their lane, but at the same time be politically aware.
Mm.
So I hope that the stories I just told are things that are pretty much in our work culture at iPlace. I think they are.
Yeah. Or to keep working at that, and how would you help diagnose or understand the reality of your goal for the culture versus what's actually happening? Are there some ways where you sort of try to gauge? Are other leaders sharing that viewpoint that you have about encouraging people to speak up, making it safe to speak up, viewing mistakes as learning opportunities? Like, how do you gauge whether others are kind of following your lead on that?
Well, I think most companies have core values. They're on their website, and I think most of the times they're BS because my experience is that with most companies, if they're in a situation where they have the option of following their core values but making less money in the short run, or ignoring their core values and taking the money, most companies take the money.
Yeah.
But from day one, in fact, the very first thing we did in iPlace, so this is going back to 2006. We had 4 employees, but we had 2 clients signed up because there were people I knew who were doing me favors, not because we were a brand new company. So I can't even say we weren't good. We didn't even have anything.
Sure.
So on the first day of the company, I think everybody knew that we had these 2 clients. They were starting in 2 weeks. We had 2 weeks to get our act together, and I think everyone thought we were going to go to the whiteboard and draw a recruiting process and do mock calls and practice. But we didn't do that. We spent the whole first day about the type of company we wanted to be, what
Mm,
our pay should be, what would make people feel that this was a really special company where they were going to build something bigger than they could build individually.
mhm,
And we have always put our core values first.
mhm.
Everybody knows it.
Yeah.
We have a lot of cool things. Like one of the things we have in our company is we have an I pledge wall. So it's a big wall where we have all our core values written. And every 6 months, we do a presentation on our core values, and everyone in the company goes and signs the I pledge wall to reaffirm their commitment to it.
Mhm.
And so uh, we will always follow our core values, even if it means we're losing money in the short run.
Mm. Wow. And you said, I mean, that's great to hear. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Hank. Some companies would, yeah, just they want the statement that sounds good on the website. Sometimes healthcare organizations do the same thing, but is it really lived intentionally and consistently? But you said earlier, Hank, and I thought this was really powerful. Paraphrasing a bit, to be a leader, you have to have followers. You can't just tell people what to do. I mean, how as CEO. Um, tell us more about that. I mean, I'm guessing the idea applies. You can't just tell people they need to follow the core values, or how do you gain followership amongst your employees?
Well, I think a lot of it comes from an example,
Mhm.
right? So, one of the things that, we have as a value, a lot of companies, integrity. We've been in business 17 years. We have never, ever paid a bribe, not one rupee. Now, that might not sound so amazing to Americans. If you're running a company in India for 17 years,
Mhm.
that's pretty spectacular.
Mhm.
But if a vendor tries to bribe us, they are fired on the spot,
Wow.
and they're told that. Uh, the government in India, and especially the local government, will frequently look for bribes.
Mhm.
Usually, they'll tell you you're going to get a big fine, but if you talk to a consultant, it can be solved for a lot lower money, and they'll tell you
Mhm.
to talk to.
Yeah.
We've had cases like that. We never do it. We'll fight it forever. And they now we're pretty much left alone. But it's more than that. We have we we have a core value of respect. We've had two cases where we had clients where we're being very disrespectful to our recruiters, literally swearing at them, calling them names.
Mhm.
I fired both of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
We lost money when they did that. But
Right.
who's going to treat our employees that way?
Yeah.
And so, that spreads through the company real fast when you do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like one of these situations where there's a short-term cost, you lose some business, but the long-term benefit is powerful in terms of employees being loyal to iPlace and helping reinforce that culture. That's would you agree? It's a matter of like not just doing the right thing, but thinking long term.
I would agree. I'm a little more experienced now. I would agree that I would like to believe that, but I'm not sure that's actually the case.
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of unethical companies do very, very well and make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Um, at the end of the day, it really comes down to how you want to conduct yourself and what
Hmm.
you believe in. And there's things more important than money, at least to me.
Yeah.
Uh, so I would rather conduct myself the way I'm proud of
Mhm.
and make less money.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I used to tell this story when about when my I have two daughters, and when they were very, very little, and and um, at the every night we did this ritual where they would they would just like be in their bed screaming, "Daddy, daddy, daddy, give me a kepi kiss." So kepi is your forehead.
Yeah.
So I would go and I'd give them these kisses on their forehead, and they would go, "Do it again, do it again," and I would do it and do it and do it again. And when it came to ethical issues, these were like my little angels. And my test to myself was when I'm sitting in their room giving my little girls kepi kisses, if they understood what I did at work that day and how I conducted myself, would they be proud of their daddy?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then you're not doing it right. even if you're making more money, getting the no answer.
Yeah,
So I don't actually believe that companies are more ethical, do better in the long run. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I do believe that, doing better doesn't just mean making more money.
sure. Yeah, no, I agree. And, I didn't form the question real clearly. I wasn't necessarily suggesting, um, I was trying to think of more your situation, that you are doing the right thing and there's short-term loss, and I admire, and it's great to stand by those values. But I was saying, like, for you and for your companies, the long-term benefit, it seems like, would far outweigh any short-term hit of losing a client, or, it's similar. It's just, it goes hand in hand. And I'm not saying for all companies that being more ethical would lead to more success, but it seems like in your situation, it's hand in hand. It's maybe less of a trade-off over the long term.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And I think the best, you know, piece of evidence of that is just our management team. I mean, if you look at our top 15 people, it's just like every one of them has been with us over 10 years, and most of them are working a night shift,
Yeah,
right? So, that's not, it's not the type of thing where, people work night shifts and stay with the company 10 and 15 years, but almost our whole management team has done that. So they believe in what we're doing.
yeah, yeah. Well, I want to share a little bit for the audience. I mean, in terms of leading by example, and how I was able to see you do that, Hank. For the audience sake, my first exposure to iPlace was being invited. I want to thank Akil for doing that and helping me through the process. Inviting me to give a short presentation for an internal iPlace event, a knowledge sharing session. And so I was invited to talk a little bit about learning from mistakes and some of my reflections, and thinking about how do we create this culture. I didn't really know up until fairly, I don't know, a couple of days before the session, or that you were going to be part of it, Hank. And the structure of the session by Akil was really good, of keeping my presentation short and opening space for people within iPlace to share a favorite mistake story. And I appreciated that you went first. You told that story from the telecom company. So I was curious your reflections around, your thought process of going first, sharing that story. What example you would hope that sets, and the influence that has on the culture of not just the story, but your willingness to share.
Sure. Well, so the knowledge sharing session is, that is actually something that Akil came up with, and he created that. So he's our EVP of business transformation, another really really smart guy.
Mhm.
And we and so knowledge sharing is one of our core values, created on day one.
Yeah.
And so so when Akil came up with this idea of bringing in thought leaders and business experts from really all over the globe, we do one of these sessions every 2 months. They're they're done over Zoom.
Mhm.
They're not mandatory that people attend, but we have probably about 85% attendance.
Yeah.
Most of the people who don't attend, we have a big team that's in Australia and stuff, so you're right in the middle of their sleep hours, so sometimes they don't attend and so forth, but we get very good attendance.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about these sessions are that they're not about recruiting.
Mhm.
All right. So
Yeah.
they're usually about, how to be a better leader, better manager, have to do with health and well-being. And so I think our employees really appreciate that, this isn't immediately directly related to their job. It's really to, make them not only better employees, but better people.
Yeah.
I thought it was important to go first because we always tell people that they're hired for their brain. They were
Mhm.
hired because they were smart. And if they have great ideas and they stay in their brain and they don't share them,
Mhm.
and they don't do anyone any good.
Right.
And that, my belief is that mistakes are not mistakes if you learn from them. If you learn from them, they're an investment.
Yeah.
And so I, you know, try to make it safe for people to admit their mistakes, especially if, show how they've learned from them, what they're doing differently. And so I thought it was important to go first to just make it a little bit more of a safe space for people to speak up. And
Yeah.
I do think we
Yeah.
have a culture where that happens very regularly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember you saying some of those same things in that session to your team. And I thought that was really powerful. Like, this idea of if you learn from them, it's an investment. The mistake can be an investment. The learning is an investment as opposed to being just a cost. I thought that was great. And then, four, five, six people, I think, there was time for other people to share stories. And I thought your reactions to the stories were very, were kind and constructive. And I told you when we chatted privately afterwards that your body language and attentiveness came through very clearly, even through a little Zoom window. And whether your employees noticed, I'm sure they did. Like, I thought, it wasn't even just what you said in terms of thanking them for sharing the story, but like that was noticeable, and I thought that was another great example of leading by example. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. And we also, besides our external speakers, if anyone at iPlace wants to present to the company, they can do that. So we've had, I think, 3 cases where we just had employees, not generally the most senior employees, and they just go and they talk about, something that they've done in recruiting and how it's helped them. And these sessions are usually shorter, maybe 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, but we bring the whole company in. And we try very hard to reinforce that. We have these shout outs that you can do to the whole company, and you'll see after someone does that, they get probably 20 shout outs from people just saying how great it was that they had the courage to talk about that in front of the whole company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to thank you, Hank, from that internal session, for giving me permission to share a little bit of your story, and especially that thought about learning from mistakes as an investment. I'm holding up, this is just a mock-up, but for the book, The Mistakes That Make Us. Thank you for allowing me to include some of that. And for today, not just sharing your own favorite mistake story, but to have this opportunity to delve into culture and what you're doing there at iPlace. I think that's a great example, and I'm happy that you could share your thoughts around all of that here today too.
Well, as I mentioned to you, when you asked me permission to have a short section in your book, I was shocked and so flattered. And of course, now we'll buy 900 copies for our employees.
Well, that was not my intent.
And I'm only joking, of course, but that was really, really
Yeah.
kind of you, and as I said,
Yeah.
very flattering.
Yeah. Well, maybe one other question, Hank. When you talk about learning from mistakes, are there kind of methods, or like how do you make sure the learning sticks in terms of not repeating mistakes, and then helping lessons or ideas spread so others can learn from a mistake somebody else made?
Well, just in learning in general, at least at iPlace, we have a pretty extensive professional development department. We have a great learning management system. I think there's over 400 courses in it. Some are mandatory for new employees, but we're always encouraging people to take the courses. And our professional development team, one of the best thing is when people take courses, they follow up with them for about 6 months to make sure they're implementing the courses. Because I do agree that in my experience, probably the biggest problem with training is you learn great things and then you go back and just do your job the way you've always done it,
Yeah.
and you don't really implement the things you've learned. So at least at iPlace, we have a big emphasis on implementation and follow up by a professional development team.
And then there's, do I remember right that there was a mechanism for sharing lessons learned within the company as well? Or is that my mistake? I thought this had been mentioned.
Well, you know, the knowledge sharing sessions, we have the little mini sessions that people can talk about. I'm not sure if we have a formal process, but you know, we do encourage people over and over and over. One of the things about communication in a company is you can't say it too many times because there's always new employees, there's always people who aren't paying attention, there are always people who forget. So a lot of our marketing communications is internally focused, and these sort of messages are we hammer on them.
Yeah. So that reinforcement and the leading by example, thank you, Hank, for doing that, and sharing with us today. And then, we'll go quickly about iPlace. You mentioned that you're the only US based employee. Where are your customers based, and what types of companies do you serve?
So we have, as I said, about 950 employees. We're working on 5 continents, and we've placed people in 30 countries.
Wow.
I would say the bulk of our clients are in the US, but a lot of them are global. So we have, one of our bigger clients, we work with them in 8 different countries. And, what our business is recruitment process outsourcing. So companies outsource our part of their talent acquisition function to iPlace. In most cases, that means that we provide big teams of recruiters for them. But we also have clients where we do research and administration all around the recruiting process. One of the things we specialize in is in these large hiring projects. So if you're a company that has to hire hundreds of people, and you had to do it in 2 or 3 months, you don't want to hire a team of 50 recruiters internally, and then when the project's over, let them go.
Right.
So they'll hire us, we'll put on a massive team, and when the project's over, hopefully we'll get more work. Sometimes the project's over and the project's over. But that's one of the things that we can really do for companies, and we can do that in countries all over the world.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing a little bit about that, Hank. I'll make sure there's a link to the website in the show notes. Again, we've been joined by Hank Levine, CEO of iPlace USA, global recruitment process outsourcing company. Hank, thank you so much for what you're doing and for sharing so much here with us today. Really appreciate it.
And Mark, this was fun. So thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks.